Tonight we continue our series of interviews with candidates running for Boston City Council in the preliminary election on September 24th. Our guest is running in Allston-Brighton for the seat being vacated in District 9 by Mark Siomo. We'd like to welcome Liz Breedon. Thank you very much for being with us, Liz.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Liz, first of all, talk about what attracted you about Allston-Brighton. This is not the place you originally came from, so what made you stay in this neighborhood?
Well, I came from Northern Ireland in 1995, and I originally settled and lived in Roslindale for a few years. And then I met my partner, and her family had a long association with Oak Square, and that's where I settled. And then I fell in love with the neighborhood. I love the neighborhood. There's a lot of diversity there. There's a lot of really dedicated citizen activists, and we have some really wonderful institutions there, and I got very engaged with that community at an early stage, and I've been there ever since.
What got you started on that?
Well, you may remember there was the issue with the presentation school
Near Oak Square.
In
right?
Oak Square, right. And I joined other leaders in the community in an effort to keep that facility as a community resource. And we fought that battle, and it's now established as the Presentation School Foundation Community Centre, and is thriving. So that was my first big activist engagement with the neighbourhood. And then following that, Mayor Menino decided that he wanted to close the Faneuil Branch Library again in Oak Square. And it's a wonderful little library. And the community said, no, we really want to save this and keep it open. And we fought that battle, and we won that battle as well. So there's tremendous neighbourhood cohesion and a commitment to try and make Allston-Brighton a better place, and an open and welcoming place that all are welcome in, and that different economic people from different economic groups can live there and thrive and live well together.
One thing I remember about both of those campaigns, almost like a common denominator, is people in the neighborhood trying to keep it the kind of place that would have more families, more owner-occupants, at least people who have really committed to stay there in the long term. What has happened to the neighborhood since then?
Well, it's pretty much the same issues, only I would say it's probably intensified since then. The issue of trying to keep the neighbourhood family friendly so that there's housing that's affordable for families, and that the schools, that their families are willing to stay for the schools. So the schools and the cost of housing are two major issues. And we have a declining owner occupancy level. Brighton has fallen now from about 26% down to about 23% owner occupancy, and Allston has gone down to about 9.3%. If you compare that to a neighbourhood like West Roxbury, which is 65%, then you can see that our civic infrastructure is being eroded, and we feel that the neighbourhood is at a tipping point, and we're really trying to push back against that.
One thing I also recall about the Presentation School campaign is that you were up against the powerful force, the Archdiocese of Boston, and you got them to change their plans. What did you learn from that about what it takes to be a city councillor?
I think tenacity and just sticking with it and trying to build a broad coalition of support. Because in the early stages of that campaign, it was really focused on the parents of the children in that school, Catholic school. But that campaign was broadened across the neighbourhood, and we had Jewish folks supporting the effort. We had people from all sorts of diverse backgrounds who became involved and committed to that fight. And I think we just stuck at it and built a broad coalition.
Well, what's also going on in the neighborhood right now, more than people might have foreseen back at that time, is how much new construction there would be between Harvard and the Turnpike, but also just this high-density housing that people would have thought would have been unimaginable 20 years ago. What has that been like for you in the Civic Association?
It's been very concerning, because we're building huge numbers of new housing units, like thousands, like I think the last count was over 6,000 in the pipeline or built already. A lot of it is totally unaffordable for the folks who live here in Allston-Brighton, and a lot of it is not suitable for families. So we're not actually relieving the pressure that we have on housing for families in the neighbourhood by building all this new housing. The young people, they say it's targeted at young professionals, But if you talk to young professionals in the neighbourhood, their incomes would not be able to pay that level of rentals. Continuum has one of their studios is priced at $4,700 a month. That's a lot of money for young professionals who are earning, $65,000 if they're earning that. So it's a really tricky situation. The idea that one argument is if you build more housing, that these young professionals will move into that housing, and then it'll free up the more family-style homes for families. But the young professionals in their late 20s and 30s are still roommates and staying in the two-family homes that we have. They're not buying the product of moving into the condos and the rental apartments that are being built.
Looking maybe a decade into the future, especially around North Allston, I can see a lot of smart economy jobs, not unlike the seaport, that will be cropping up, and more people who want to live near them. So how do you cushion the neighborhood from that, at least the people who are vulnerable to displacement?
I think we have to do a better job at ensuring more affordable home ownership opportunities so that young families can stay, rather than just focus it all on young singles who are professionals and who are going to work in this new economy. Sooner or later, those 20-somethings and 30-somethings are going to partner up and want to start families, and we're seeing more and more young children in the neighbourhood. But when you talk to those young people, when you're out door knocking, they say, I want to stay here, I want to buy a home here, but I can't afford it. And again, it's a perennial problem. It's the same theme that I hear over and over again when I'm out in the neighbourhood.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Liz Breedon, candidate for City Council in District 9. Liz, I know Allston-Brighton isn't very far from downtown Boston, by some standards at least, but people must have some transportation issues. What would you like to do about those? Transportation is a huge issue.
I think we're in a sort of a transportation crisis at the moment. One issue is to really improve the Green Line, so that maybe consolidate some of the stops and make it more, take less time to get downtown. We have a dedicated bus lane between Union Square and Packards Corner, and it's definitely a step in the right direction. It can be shared with bicycles. But I think we have to try and educate the other road users to, make more infrastructure for bicyclists, protected bike lanes. So I think it requires many different approaches. There's no one answer to solving our transportation issues, but improvements in public transit, improvements in our buses, and protected bicycle lanes are all part of the package that we need to think about.
How does education figure into the future of this neighborhood? Because you have Brighton High, which has had some performance issues in recent years, some work being done at the Jackson Mann School. What would you like to see?
Well, the Jackson Mann situation is of great concern because they have said that they're going to close that facility in 2 years because of by their own admission, deferred maintenance, and they really need to demolish part of the building as far as I understand. So there's big questions as to how that's going to be resolved. The school situation is a big issue for families in the neighbourhood. And I'd really work as a city councillor to try and ensure that we can lift those standards. We seem to put all our eggs in one basket with regard to our high schools. Like if a child is lucky enough to get into the exam school, that's wonderful. But there's so many other children who end up in the other high schools, and we need to really invest in those high schools and make sure that regardless of where the child ends up, that they get a good education. And I'm also concerned about, vocational education for young people who want to take up a trade. They should be able to get a good, high-quality technical education in a technical high school as well in the city.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Liz Breedon, candidate for City Council in District 9.